Gaby Hoffmann stars in the new limited series Eric on Netflix. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Gaby, this series, and in particular, your character and her journey, are so emotional and so harrowing. Um, I just wanted to start by asking, how do you prepare yourself as a performer emotionally to go into those kind of depths of grief and such challenging emotional material?
Well, hi, thanks for having me. To be honest, I have never known how to prepare before. I didn't study, and it's something that since kind of coming back to acting in the last decade, because I was a child actress and then I left, I've wanted to sort of be able to engage with a role prior to filming, and I haven't really known how. And sometimes I ask my actor friends, like, should I go to a class or like get a teacher? And everybody's like, no, don't do anything. Like, don't mess with it. And I sort of thought, like, well, if it's that fragile of a thing, like, then I've got to poke it, like I can't be as scared of that. So this opportunity to play Cassie felt like a really good one to try to sort of begin to have a new relationship with myself upon entering. So I asked a good friend of mine, Maggie Siff, who's a wonderful actress and an incredible person, what she thought I might do. And she sent me to talk with this woman named Julie Areola, who's an acting teacher. But we just sat and talked. We didn't run lines or anything. We just kind of mused about this character and psychoanalyzed her and empathized with her and just like the way we would talk about a friend. And it was, I think it was just like 1 hour, but it was really interesting. And, of course, I love that kind of chat. And she gave me a couple of ideas, and, I sort of like wrote down the scenes in order, real basic stuff like, oh, here's the trajectory of her journey. And just started thinking about her like at night before I went to bed and sort of inviting her into my consciousness. And I made a playlist for her. These are things that other actors, I think, do all the time. But it was my first time. And by the time I arrived on set, and especially, costumed and hair and makeup, I really already felt like she was kind of swimming around in me. And it was, I kind of initially always have a sense of who somebody is, at least if I'm drawn to them enough to want to play them. But it was sort of like, usually I sort of have that sense, and then I'm like, okay, now I'll just show up and dive in. And it was more sort of like, oh, I have this sense. And like, I kind of started dancing with her a little bit internally. And then when I showed up on set, our art department did such a gorgeous job. And again, my costume, hair, and makeup was so wonderful that it just sort of filled out and immediately. And all I really had to do was walk through that door and everything felt available to me. And the music really helped actually. And I know actors love to do that. And I was always sort of like, ah. And I would just, through one or two songs I would listen to in my trailer before entering set, and it would just kind of click me into her emotional space. And then everything felt, yeah, kind of right there.
Let's dive into something you're touching on, which is just how immersive, the set, the scenic design, everything is, because I know you were born and raised in the 80s in New York City. I don't know how many memories you have, of that time because you were quite young when this series is set, but how transporting is that for you? Was it just evocative of your childhood to kind of step back into 80s New York at a much different moment in your life, obviously? Like how transporting was that experience?
Yeah. I mean, it was my entire childhood. I left New York City. I grew up in the Chelsea Hotel and we left there when I was 11. So, I mean, sure, many memories. All of my childhood memories are New York in the 80s and early 90s. And oddly, we shot the series in Budapest, and then New York City, the exteriors. But I oddly grew up with a huge amount of Hungarians around me. My best friend was Hungarian, and she was part of a theater company called the Squat Theater, and it was a group of families that moved from Budapest to New York City in 1979 and lived on the same block as me. And I like lived over at their house. So being in Budapest in New York City in the 80s made perfect sense to me. And the city has a sort of an intensity, Budapest does. You know, got obviously a very dark and troubled history, and it wears it, and you feel it. And it's beautiful, but it's kind of chipped beauty. And, you know, New York in the 80s was a heavy place, but also so vibrant and full of life. And so there was something about Budapest that rhymed with me. But yes, really, it was walking on to that apartment set day one, that very different than the apartment I grew up in, much nicer, but the feeling, they got it so well that I started to weep, actually. And I'm not like particularly a nostalgic person, although I do miss New York City in the 80s. But yeah, it was very evocative. It was very emotional. It was shocking to me. It was really arresting. I didn't anticipate it, but it was also, you know, that's what's sort of mysterious and wonderful about this work. That was also all wrapped up in Cassie and that world, you know, so it was sort of hard to pull, you know, which thread led where. Was it my childhood, or was it just this world? I didn't really know, but that was sort of wonderful because I got to swim in all of that as this character, you know.
Let's talk about the apartment, because you get some extraordinary scenes and such beautiful performances in that apartment. And when I spoke to Lucy Forbes, your director, she said you shot all the apartment scenes in a 2-week span.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about how complicated is that as a performer for you and for Benedict, because there's so many different emotions happening in those 6 episodes in that space to kind of chart that journey before you start filling in everything else. What was that like for you in those 2 weeks?
It was pretty great, actually, to be able to dive into, you know, kind of what is the source, the center of this world for her emotionally, which is this apartment, this family, this dynamic. To start with that, I actually found very helpful, because sort of like out of that place, everything else grows. And you know, once you enter that space and start to build that world, it's nice to then be able to live in it. It was tricky in the way that it always is tricky in the first couple of days, as Benedict, you know, put it. We were building the plane as it was taking off. So, you know, there was so much there immediately between Benedict and I, just naturally, but of course also given the writing, and Lucy held us so beautifully in the apartment and all of that. We just had so much infrastructure, really. But then there was also just a natural understanding, I think, between he and I of who these two people were and where they were in their relationship at that time. So it was honestly, there were just details that we had to work out. And that's, to me, that's the fun bit. Like, if you've got strong writing and you've got strong collaborators and you have an actor who's like ready to grab your hand and dive into the deep end and, you know, start drowning and emerge for air and go back down and figure it out together, that's the really fun stuff. And Benedict was a wonderful, you know, robust partner in crime in that respect. So it was a lot of fun those early days, even though it was hard, heavy work. I mean, that's what we're after, right? Those big, getting to swim in those big emotional waves those are the best days at work for me, at least.
One of my favorite scenes of yours is a small one, and you don't have any dialogue in it, but it's in episode 3, I think, when you're dancing to Love and Affection. I just had to ask you about, you know, there's so much right from the jump in this series. There's so much emotional work, as you're describing. And then to have a moment where your character doesn't have to speak, but is kind of releasing something through movement and through just feeling things. I just had to ask you, how cathartic is that to just kind of, you know, express that character through movement rather than through dialogue?
This is going to be a slightly long answer because there's a cool story here. So I said I made a playlist before showing up on set, and there were, I think, 3 Joan Armatrading songs on that playlist. I'm a big Joan Armatrading fan. And I had sent it to Lucy, but like somehow we hadn't yet talked about it. And it was the first day together and we were going through the script, and we all felt that there was a moment needed for Cassie that wasn't written, where we got to see her alone in her apartment, sort of, yeah, again, not not doing, but just being. And we were playing around with ideas, and I don't remember who, Lucy, somebody said, what if she just puts on a record and walks around the space? And I thought, that sounds great. That's my dream. And then I forgot about it. And a couple weeks later, I was on set, and Lucy came over to me and said, remember that dance scene we talked about? She was like, we've got an hour now. We could squeeze it in. You want to try it? And I said, sure. And she said, let's do a Joan Armatrading song. What about Love and Affection? Which was not on my playlist originally, but it was something Lucy brought in, although I love that song too. So we do it maybe 3 or 4 times. I love to dance, and I love shooting scenes this way. Like, it was just Benedict, not Benedict Cumberbatch, but our DP was Benedict, and I in the room for an hour playing. And it was very cathartic. It was very beautiful. It was really an incredible creative experience for me. And we all loved it. And then I think the next night we were out to dinner, all of us. And I'm at one end of the table, and Lucy and my husband and Clark Peters, who plays George, are at the other end of the table. And that week I had gotten to spend a lot of time with Clark on set, and I had just fallen in love with him, and we had so much in common, and we were bonding over everything. And they erupt at the other end of the table and call me over, and I go over there. And it turns out Clark Peters is the male singer on Love and Affection.
Wow.
He is the guy going, woo. And we didn't even know, we didn't have the rights. Like, Lucy was just like, if we can't get the rights, we'll throw something else in there. And then it turns out that Clark was Joan Armatrading's collaborator on that song. So it felt all very sort of magical and mysterious and wonderful. And then we did get the rights, which was nice.
That's an amazing story. I can't believe the, serendipity of that moment.
And those moments, to me, these moments of coincidence, which feel much bigger than coincidence, are like kind of the stuff I live for. And that one felt really big and beautiful, and like, okay, I must be in the right place.
One other scene in the apartment I want to ask you about is, of course, that kind of breakup scene between Cassie and Vincent, where she admits that she's pregnant. What I love about that scene and your work and Benedict's work is it's not just one thing. There are so many levels to that conversation, and it changes as it kind of unfolds. I just wanted to ask you about shooting that. I mean, working with Benedict and the other Benedict and Lucy, and just exploring, like you said, these really big emotions, but I just love how genuinely they come across. It's not just all anger. It's not just all grief. It's just so layered. So what was it like? How much time did you have to kind of find that and to explore the space? Because it's all, moving so kind of fluidly.
Yeah, and there are a few of those scenes in the first few episodes, right? So, each one had its own distinct choreography and feeling that we had to find. What I remember about that one, and what I thought was so enjoyable about doing it, was, you're right, there's so much, it's so complex what's happening. And I've been with my husband person now for almost 18 years, and like that, there is a world of experience and feeling in there. And, hopefully much of it is wonderful, but there's always a lot of pain and difficulty. And it was not, so it was, I was really, when I read the scene, I remember feeling so pleased to find that in there was all of it. I at least that's what I felt when we were shooting it, like the loss, the love, the dreams that have been abandoned and now are being left behind, the failure, the rage, the disappointment, the courage, the friendship. Like, I really, when we were shooting it, I'm not sure it all got in the final cut, but doing it all day, I really felt like Benedict and I each got to feel all of that in there. And that is what is, makes up a life. The sorrows and the joys, and sharing a life with somebody, even if it, ends prematurely, as this marriage does, contains it all, hopefully. And so to get to explore all of those truths in this bitter way. I was going to say bittersweet, but there's nothing sweet about it. It was really rich. I remember it was really satisfying.
Yeah, it comes across just as rich on the screen too. I have to ask you too about Cassie's relationship with Cecile, this other mother whose son is missing for a much longer period of time. That's such a rich dynamic of this series that I love that Abby has included, because the contrast of the two experiences for these two mothers is so distinct. What was it like playing those scenes? What do you think Cassie learns from that experience? She's so obviously new on this horrible journey that she's on, and to have somebody who's not there to comfort her, she's very clear about that, but it's
Yeah.
a lovely kind of rapport that they build out of something so terrible.
Yeah, that was one of the first scenes that I shot outside of the apartment stuff with Etta Pero, who isn't she just thinking about her makes me want to cry. She's so incredible, and I love her so much as a person too. So that was a great scene to start off with for me, outside of the apartment, in terms of Cassie's journey beyond the Vincent world. And yeah, I think that Cassie is lost. She's alone. She's terrified, and she doesn't know really what she needs or is looking for, but she's drawn to Cecile. And what she finds there is not just kind of recognition, but I think she gets activated by Cecile, and that's really what she needs to propel her into this next phase of her journey, not just in the search for Edgar, but really ultimately in leaving the marriage and pursuing a life outside of the dysfunction and real sickness of that family life she's been living. I think being confronted with a woman who is many, many months down the line in this grief space is startling and instructive. And though Cecile is not offering her comfort, as she says, and you remind me, she is offering her guidance in just her very presence, and she's got such strength. And obviously she's lived a much more difficult life even prior to her son's disappearance because of her class and race and circumstance. And I think Cassie's also, confronted with that reality. But to sit across from somebody that is reflecting back to you an experience you're having, but in such a different way, is always going to be an expansive and thus strengthening experience. And that's what I think she offers to Cassie. And that's what Cassie needs in order to jolt into action, really.
Yeah. Before I let you go, Gabby, I just have to ask you, do you have a favorite scene from the series that when you look back on, you're particularly proud of? Do you have a favorite day on set that you always come back to as kind of, a joyful memory of your time?
I mean, I did love the dancing scene. To do it. That was really fun. The first day I saw Eric, I walked into set, and sometimes I forget what a sensitive person I am, and I think I'm like a jaded New Yorker. But I walked onto set, and he was standing in the bathroom, and I just started crying like a kid. I was just it was such a wondrous moment, and I was like, I really felt the kind of awe that you feel less and less as an adult in certain circumstances. And I felt like a kid again, and it was cool. It was so cool. And then he looked at me, and wonderful Ollie, who was inside of Eric, sort of did a little and I thought, oh. So I remember that as being a real joyful moment. Yeah. And sort of like, oh, dude, what are we making? This is cool.
Gaby Hoffmann, congratulations on Eric. Thank you so much for talking
Thank
to me.
you. Thank you so much. It was really nice talking to you. Take care.